Welcome back to the currently unnamed ABR podcast, where we talk all things customer success. And I'm very lucky to be joined by a great name in the space, Dave Jackson. Welcome to the podcast, first and foremost.
Thank you, Luke. Good to be here.
Likewise. And I think, Dave, we've spoken a few times over the years. Actually, you've done some great work for companies that I'm really closely linked to as well. And I think it's fair to say you're a self-professed CS heretic first and foremost.
yeah, that's in my LinkedIn profile. It wasn't actually self-professed initially.
Yeah.
A friend of mine gave me that moniker, which I was pleased to receive, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And don't forget, by the way, a heretic is not someone who doesn't believe. A heretic is someone. So there's a difference between a heretic and a non-believer.
Yeah.
A non-believer just doesn't get it at all. A heretic believes in the underlying ideas, but thinks there may be different ways of doing it.
Yeah. Which led you to producing a fantastic book, Customer-Led Growth, which I've read personally, and I highly recommend. I think actually,
thank you.
I have a copy just here.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Shameless plug there. And I think,
and it wasn't prompted.
No, not at all. No, this slides the money under the desk. No, and I think it's good for people to understand your background as well. And I'd love for you to kind of introduce yourself, but certainly from a outside perspective, you've been a founder and owner of an organization. You've scaled a business. You've successfully exited. So your lens actually is quite different. It's not like you're sat in a CS role fighting for CS and giving perspective. You're giving that CEO perspective, which I think is really important. And, one of the reasons I love bringing people like yourself on, spoke to Rab recently as well. So that CS to investor kind of relationship as well. And I know you share some similar views to Rab, and I'm sure there's some bits you guys can have a good debate over as well. So yeah, it'd be great for you to jump in and just give the high level, Dave, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually not quite as old as I look, but I have been around a while. My career is quite eclectic, everything from procurement, academia, consulting, and I guess my claim to fame to being here is that in August 2000, along with a couple of other friends, I started what was probably one of the UK's first 5 SaaS companies. And we actually started that before the term SaaS was invented. So that was a company called Clicktools. It was into forms and surveys, grew that organically, no funding, and then sold it twice. So in 2010, sold 49.9% to a competitor, SurveyMonkey. And then in 2014, arranged a deal to sell 100% to a company called Callias Cloud, which I think is now part of SAP.
Yeah.
And
amazing.
since then, I've been doing something that I really like, which is coaching and advisory work. So I work purely in the B2B SaaS space, and I work mainly with CEOs in scale-up companies.
Awesome.
And the whole of my work is based around what does it take to build a business which truly focuses on its customers and make profitable revenue in doing so.
Great. And I've listened and watched a lot of the stuff you put out there, and I think it was we bumped into each other at Pulse a couple of times, I think, but you're at the customer conference earlier on in the year as well. We did a great piece. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you some questions. Like, some of them are quite basic questions, but I think it's good just to get your perspective on CS and kind of where things are headed, what your observations have been as well from experience, obviously from working with lots of different businesses, from speaking to lots of different people. And I've always enjoyed what you put out there. It's pretty candid. You don't pull your punches, and I think it's really important because we're in this era of social media and sharing of ideas and thoughts, and they're not always quantified by experience, I think is fair to say. Mm-hmm. So it'd be great to kind of dive into some of that stuff. And yeah, so if you're happy to, I'll dive into some questions, and I'll start with the simple one. Customer success. What is it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think in my head, it's 2 things. If you ask most people what customer success is, then they'll talk about a team and a department. And they'll probably mention something about it being an operating philosophy. I'm very much in the latter camp than the former camp.
Right.
And I think it's important to make a very big difference between customer success, which is what a lot of people talk about when they talk about the teams and the disciplines and the departments and the playbooks and QBRs and all that good sort of stuff. That's a marked difference from customers' success. That apostrophe S really matters.
Yeah.
And I'm a great believer in the latter. I think the core purpose of any B2B SaaS company is to deliver measurable results to customers that translates into profitable revenue for the company. And that's putting the customer's success at the heart of everything that they do. And I think the problem is that people misunderstand that versus a narrower view of customer success, which is typically what happens after the sale, after the first sale. To me, it's not. It's something it's the red thread that runs right through the whole go-to-market and product approach.
Yeah. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that perception of CS is maybe somewhat skewed a lot of the time? Do you think it's the legacy? And something I've talked to others about being, I guess, pre-SaaS, everything was kind of on-premise. So once sold in, and if anyone watched the last interview I did with Rav, he talked a lot about services and support. That's kind of the viewpoint of CS. Anything after the sale is just services and support. Do you think that kind of legacy view has kind of transitioned?
I do. In fact, there's I think one of the biggest problems that we face is that we tend to define new challenges with old language and old ideas.
Right.
I think, a lot of people in the past and still today talk about legacy technology being a problem. I think the bigger problem is legacy mindsets.
Yeah.
And, SaaS is a very different business model, and we've made some changes, but all too often we do, as you just mentioned and Raf talked about, we go back to old ideas and try and fit them into this new model. And I think that's it holds us back a lot.
Yeah. And there's a lot of discussion at the moment, especially when you're recruiting from our side and we're speaking to lots of different businesses, when the role of CS is being defined as, let's say, a CSM position, there's not a huge difference between a good account management role and a good customer success manager. That there's a real kind of overlap. And your thoughts on that? How do they differ?
Well, I think CSM versus AM is a very classic example of, thinking about things in old job terms. I wrote a blog sometime last year, I think it was, which talked about how this thinking gets us into problems. And I think the simple answer is, if you recognize that CS is a financial discipline, which it is, I don't think there's a lot of difference between customer success management done properly and account management done properly.
Yeah.
Because they're both trying to do the same thing. They're both trying to understand the pains and challenges that the key roles in the customer face, and how their solutions can help that. Now, sometimes that will involve selling something. Sometimes it will involve helping them use a thing better.
Yeah.
So at its core, it's not vastly different. I think that the reason is, as I say, we've got these two job titles. Therefore, we think we've got to have these two roles, rather than going back to first principles and saying, what are we trying to help the customer achieve, and how can we benefit from that in a way which is of value to the customer?
Yeah.
That's a great job description for account manager. It's a great job description for a customer success manager.
Yeah. Maybe we're just too hung up on job titles.
We are. Absolutely are.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And you were talking about this. So there is a revenue shift in terms of language within customer success. A lot of businesses they're kind of looking at the role into two parts, and it's one, the success of customers and what the metrics behind that look like, what the indicators are. But then there is a real discussion around what does that translate to in terms of business success. So really, like, how much are we growing this side of the business, and what's the revenue territory look like? That's the sort of language we're starting to hear a lot more of now. And I guess from your side, you were talking about revenue within CS in your book. When did your book get published, actually? What was the date of that?
I think it was 22.
Yeah.
2022.
So it feels like 23, 24 that it's now coming to the forefront after the learnings of the last couple of years. But it does feel like you were plugging the message somewhat early on. Why do you think it shifted? Do you think it's an economic thing? Do you think there's more pressure? Is it boards wanting to see more value from CS that they've not been seeing?
Yeah. Well, I suppose the other interesting way to look at that, Luke, is to turn it the other way around and say, why was CS never a financial discipline in the first place? What was it? I mean, let's be honest. We're not charities. Businesses are not charities. They can do good things for society, but a business will only survive if it's able to make a profit in the longer term.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that you have to rip off your customers. I think that's anybody that does that is making a big mistake. I mean, we've seen some of that. Both of us have seen cases where that doesn't work in the longer term. Might be good for short term, but it doesn't work longer term. So I think the way I describe that, the relationship between results for customers, customer value, if you want to call it that, and revenue for the company is a bit like DNA. So, DNA is made up of effectively two strands that are joined. And as it replicates, tears in half and then it reconnects. So if you focus on the value piece, the results for customers, and some of those links to the next thread, when the next thread is revenue for our company. But by focusing on delivering value for customers, results for customers, then you will get the revenue that you deserve. Now, are there execution issues in all of that? Absolutely, there are. But that fundamental premise that the primary driver of the initial sale, of the renewal, of any expansion and of advocacy is how far you can show you have delivered measurable results, improvements in measurable results for customers. I work a lot with a friend of mine, Greg Daines, and he's got some great data on the relationship between lots and lots of different factors and retention renewal.
Interesting.
And by far, the biggest factor is measurable results for customers. So Greg's data shows that even if you just measure what you're trying to achieve for customers, even if it's just measured, you are twice as likely to generate a renewal. Even if there's no improvement in it, just measuring it increases the propensity to renew twofold.
Amazing.
If you get some results from that, then you're likely to generate propensity to renewal, which is fourfold. And if you get really superior results that you can measure and you can show, propensity to renewal is likely to be up to eightfold.
Wow.
Now, the only way to achieve that is to focus on how do I help the customer achieve those results.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of the word customer value because it's a bit too nebulous. Everyone talks about value. What is it? To me, it's very simple. Value is I deliver measurable improvements in the results that matter to the key roles in my customer. And I think actually by being specific, you make it easy to get to. Defining values, but everybody go, it's got a bit ROI. Well, it's not. Relatively few people that are involved in the buying and using of your products give a tinker's cuss about ROI. Some do. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't think about it and be able to understand and relate to it. But if I'm talking to a user of my product, are they interested in ROI? Probably not. Are they interested in how I can make their work easier? Yeah. Are they interested in how I can make them more successful, improve their result? Yeah.
So I guess getting into that deeper then, so there's a lot of standardized ways of tracking customer success internally. We talk a lot about NPS and all the leading scores behind that. But getting back to your point on it's almost the customer's perception of success. How do you align yourself with that? What should you be tracking? What are the important bits?
Yeah,
would you say?
That touches on something that I've been banging on around for over 10 years. If you go into a group of SaaS people, CS leaders, sometimes sales leaders, even CEOs, and you say, how do you measure customer success? And they'll tell you it's NRR, it's GRR, it's logo churn, it's NPS.
Yeah.
My response is always the same. That's great. Now tell me the measures of your customer success. Because they're all measures of your success. They've got nothing to do with how successful the customer is.
Yeah.
And the simple truth is that there's been a lot of talk in the past 12 months, particularly, about the importance of customer value and customer results. But my experience is at the moment, it's mainly talk. Very, very, you go and ask even CS people and say, show me the results that you measure and how your products and expertise has impacted that. And they can't, because they don't.
Yeah.
They put it in the too difficult bucket and stick to stuff that they can measure. So is NRR and GRR important? Absolutely. Would I measure it? Every time. Not so sure about NPS. Greg's data again shows that, you would think that the higher the NPS score, the more likely the propensity to renew.
You think so?
Yeah, well, Greg's data shows there's absolutely zero correlation between NPS score and propensity to renew. Zero.
Interesting.
The only NPS stat that relates to it is response rate.
Right.
And that probably means if they've not responded, they've already checked out anyway.
Yeah.
You're not important enough to them to warrant their time.
So do you think there's an inherent challenge there? Because I guess what you're describing is if you're really well aligned with your customers, if you can really spend time with them and understand the challenges and the outcomes they're looking to achieve, if you can get that sticky with your customers, then there's a much higher chance of you understanding, okay, what's the potential for renewal here, because we can visibly see and track and measure their success. But do you think there's a lot more pressure on CS, a reduction in team sizes and do more with less? We've had a lot of that this year. Do you think that's one of the reasons it's quite hard to step away from things like NPS and, are we hosting enough QBRs? And do you think that's one of the challenges, or do you think it's one of the excuses?
I think it's an excuse, Luke. I think the cutbacks, and I understand, I was a CEO. The first thing I did when I went into the office every morning was check the bank balance.
Yeah.
So absolutely the first thing I did for 15 years, I checked the bank balance. Because it matters. We are commercial organizations. Now, I think the reason that I don't think the reason that there've been the cutbacks is actually because we were too focused on QBRs and playbooks and NPS and not on the things that really mattered. When this last economic shock hit, I wrote a blog, and it was, the two things you absolutely have to measure and be able to show. One is the value that you add to your organization.
Yeah.
So that's how do I increase revenue? How do I reduce costs? And then the second one is it's no point in doing that if you can't show exactly the same in terms of how do I show my customers the benefits I'm delivering to them, the value, the measurable results I'm delivering to them.
Yeah.
And CS should be built around those two things. Not QBRs. It's a bit of a pet topic of mine. I was doing some work as an advisor.
That's why I threw it in there. I knew I'd poke the bear here.
And I was asked to go in and take on an interim role for a while. And the first conversation I had with the CEO and with one of the CS leaders was around how can we improve our QBRs. This was literally the first call in this interim role. And, this 2 or 3 of them were talking about well, we should be doing this, we should be doing that, we should think of that. And my first question is, how many customers have asked you for a QBR? None. Why is that? Because they don't want them. If every SaaS provider said, I need an hour every quarter to, a senior manager in a company that they were providing solutions to, people would be spending hours and hours just doing nothing other than QBRs. They've got busy things to do, better things to do. Sorry. So, I think the reason that CS was hit by a lot of the cutbacks is that they were not focused on the right things. They weren't focused on being able to show the value, the measurable results to customers, and how that helped them deliver results for the company.
Interesting.
And the other thing, by the way, is I think the other thing that I keep mentioning the data that Greg's got, and if you've not looked at it, you should.
Yeah, we'll link that.
Great
Actually, if
ebook.
you've got a link to it, that'd
Yeah,
be great.
yeah. There's an ebook he wrote called The 23 Reasons for Churn. And he looks at the 23 reasons, looks at their impact on renewal rates and things like that. And part of it is he says, the teams that are responsible for making this happen, marketing, sales, CS, product. Greg and I did a workshop, and I did a bit of an analysis on his data. So if CS is a revenue owner, if they own the renewals and or the expansion number, of the 23 reasons for churn, CS are involved in 12. That's less than sales and about the same as marketing. If CS doesn't own any revenue, then they're only involved in 9 out of the 23 reasons for churn. And if it's a true, really deep product-led company, they're probably only involved in 1 or 2.
Interesting.
So the reason I think there's a lot of the cutbacks is people like me as a CEO are looking at things and saying, wait a minute, what contribution are you making? Well,
yeah,
I weren't able to show that because the stuff that a lot of CS people are doing is not making a difference to the retention number. It's not making a difference to the expansion number.
Yeah.
And unless people stand up and take responsibility for it, and it is happening, the shift that we've seen, Luke, over the last 2 to 3 years is quite phenomenal.
Yeah, agreed.
But let's be honest, a lot of them have been forced into that against their best wishes. They've gone into it reluctantly.
It's interesting. So if I look at it from like a different lens, actually, from a recruitment perspective, I think early on, there are a lot of individuals that wanted almost to escape sales and those account management roles to the safe haven of CS, which didn't have that kind of commercial overlay. And I personally, and this is no insult to anyone in CS, it's our world, but I think there's perhaps a lot of individuals that don't want that part of the role, that are fighting to protect it. And it's then becoming all about the customer and not being able to translate that to the board language, being able to speak about revenue and what that activity with your customer contributes to in terms of overall business. And I do think that's potentially one of the areas where it's become a negative for CS, and it's created a bit of a perception of this department that's not necessarily tied to the revenue. Ergo, easier to churn.
Yeah, I think it's the American investor, the sage of Omaha, Warren Buffett, who said, when the tide goes out, you can see who's swimming without trunks.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened. Now, do I understand that people don't want some of that? I think yes. And I think part of the reason for that, Luke, and you were in sales.
Yeah.
You still are in a way. I am.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for that is what I would call the perception of the old sales model. The perception of it's hard sell. It's you're going to get this whether you want it or not. All I'm bothered about is my commission number.
Yeah.
But if you take the view that the best form of selling is that which says, this is how I recognize that you've got this issue. And by the way, if you've not, I don't want to talk to you anyway.
Yeah.
I should be screening you out because you're not a good fit customer for me.
Yeah.
Then I understand your issue. This is how we help you as an individual, as a team of individuals. This is how we help you. Yeah. And this is the benefit and results that we're going to deliver. And then follow through on that as an organization.
Yeah.
Call it what you want. Call it consultative selling, value selling, outcome selling.
Yeah.
I think that's the best form, and always has been the best form of selling.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so identifying that challenge and actually whether we're capable of delivering against it, and that's where you bring the two together.
Which puts the understanding of the results that you can and will deliver for key roles in chosen customers at the heart of everything that any go-to-market activity should be involved in.
Yeah.
So, this idea of measurable results for key roles, I always describe as the red thread. So it's what marketing markets, it's what sales sell, it's what the product should deliver, and it's what services, and I use the word services rather than CS specifically, should enable.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of data that shows that the challenges of lack of alignment. I mean, you and I both know organizations where marketing and sales they've been arguing about whose lead is that, and how do we convert that?
Is it an MQL? Is it an SQL? Yeah.
Now, do some of those definitions matter? Yes, they do. But if you put this red thread through, then what you start to do is you get the basis, a very fundamental and strong basis for aligning all of the teams.
Yeah. Because
they're all chasing the same thing. They're all saying, how does what we do communicate, sell, deliver, and enable measurable results for our chosen customers?
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the analogy I always use is it's the relay race effect, isn't it? And the customer's the baton, and everyone should be running together at a point. So you set up the customer for success. The first runner gets to the second. If they dead stop, then nothing happens. You fail. It'd be a weird relay race, wouldn't it? You just run up to a point, you stop, and then you start again, which I think some businesses might do, to be honest.
Well, I'm laughing, Luke, because it brings to mind, your analogy rings to mind. It's like, imagine running a relay race. You get to the end of your that where that first line is, where you started to think about, and you stop and you throw the button.
Yeah. And someone will be a really good catcher, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes they'll catch it. And I think that happens in some businesses. So they keep running with it. But it's quite interesting. It's funny, though, you mentioned the sales and marketing piece again. I always say the same thing. And I'd love your thoughts on this. But I think I always rewind to marketing years and years ago. It was referred to as the colouring in department. It was the...
Right.
Do the nice stuff, the pretty stuff for the business, for customers, etc. And then what happened is there was a lot of pressure on marketing where the questions were being asked around what value it was adding. It wasn't measurable value. So things started to happen around, let's say, an event. A marketing team would attend an event, and instead of just making the event look nice, it'd be like, okay, how many conversations did we generate? How many leads did we generate? How many of those leads converted to sale? And then the MQL started to develop, and all of a sudden, marketing became a GTM strategy, which is essential and aligned with sales. Is it perfect? No. Is sales perfect? No. But the departments work a lot better together, and I think CS is starting now to, to your point around kind of the business value, it's starting to be like, right, actually, we need to crack this, and we need to start really showing what the value is to the business. But also to your point, it's quite interesting around the customer value side, because I think a lot of businesses think they've got that bit cracked. They're just not being able to translate that to business metrics. But I think they hide behind the QBRs, the stuff that that's maybe not as...
I would argue that if they think they've got it cracked and they can't relate it to metrics that matter to their customers, they haven't got it cracked.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. Okay. I had a question around what's the biggest mistakes you think that SaaS leadership teams are making, but I think we've covered some of it, but we can definitely elaborate on that.
This stuff about building a joined up organization. If I go back to my company, we never grew massively, but there was a point where I think it was around 2010, 2012, something like that, where we just weren't getting the sort of growth. And we had this real battle between marketing and sales. The leads are crap. Oh, they're not. It's just that you're not doing anything with them. And so we got this friction. And we spent some time really digging into, what some of those issues were. And we came out with probably 3 things that made a massive difference. One was we developed a very, very detailed ideal customer profile. And that profile had 3 parts. Who are the companies that we're targeting? And within those companies, what are the key roles that buy from us and use us? and what are their needs? How are they measured? Where do they go to help and advice? What are their challenges? What are their jobs to be done? Really deep into that piece particularly. And then the third piece were what we call situational factors. We had a guy, a sales guy helping, a sales consultant helping us to do some of this stuff initially. Situational factors were, well, what causes someone to want to buy? What causes them to be thinking about churning? What causes them to thinking about expanding? Because that drives the context.
Yeah.
Some people call that, talk about it in terms of intent data. So we put a lot of work and effort into building that. And then the second thing we did was we scrapped our marketing and sales process.
Right.
Because what we did was replace it with an outside-in customer life cycle.
Interesting. So
every stage was defined in terms of what the customer or the prospect is trying to achieve at the stages they're going through. Because we think about our sales we talk about MQLs and SQLs. Well, customers don't think about it as that. Prospects don't think about it. They think, I've got this. Well, first thing is they're not aware that they've got a challenge you can help them with. So what does marketing do? Marketing puts out some great, probably product-free content about, these are the issues and this is what some people are doing about it.
Yeah.
And that's what I would call true demand generation. And then they start to feed in, well, this is how good people do it, and this is how we help in that. And you convert them, and it becomes less of a marketing communication, and then it starts to become a sales conversation. And then you carry that forward, and they buy and they start to use, and then all these promises you've made, you've got to deliver. So we built that customer life cycle, and every stage was defined using a word or very short phrase in terms of what the customer's doing or prospects doing at that stage.
Right.
And we took this as far as actually making those the lead and opportunity stages in our CRM, Salesforce.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that highlights sorry.
It was all outside in. It was all focused on what are our chosen customers, what are the challenges they're facing, how can we help them address it at different stages.
Yeah.
Now that completely changed our performance. It significantly increased our ACV, our average customer value, increased our retention, it reduced our sales cycle, and it increased our word of mouth. Why? Because we were just so intently focused on helping them do something. There's a guy that I know, Bill Cushard. He used to do a really good podcast. It was called Helping Sells, and he always in his introduction he used to say, helping sells, but selling doesn't help. And to me, helping is the best form of selling. It's back to how can I help you overcome this challenge? How can I help you improve your results? It's back to what is true, results-based or value-based selling is. But it can't be just at the sales. It has to be the red thread. And what I learned as a CEO is that my job is to orchestrate that. I look back on my times and then think of myself as, one of the primary roles of a CEO is that of chief organization designer. And organization design's got diddly squat to do with lines and boxes and response and roles and team structures. It's got to do with the values and cultures that you instill, the frameworks that you embed, the metrics that you put in place.
Yeah.
It's all the it's not soft stuff actually, because it's quite hard. But it's not lines and boxes. You could create almost any structure you wanted and make it work if you've got the right underlying frameworks and metrics and culture.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting, and it really emphasizes the threading of each department from start to finish. Selling to the right customer first and foremost is really important. But the question I would perhaps have, and then this is just based on feedback I've had when having conversations with early stage businesses, the ICP element is sometimes harder to define when you're taking a newer product to market. And there's an element, and there's an element of we almost need to win business and almost cultivate that and see who the winners and losers are before redefining the prospect. And
Sure.
what would you say in that sort of scenario?
I think there's a big element of truth in that, Luke. But I would say two things. One is developing an ICP for a real startup is a different process to an established business. The biggest reason is paucity of data. You just don't have the data. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have some insights and you don't have some information, because without that, you probably couldn't have formed a product idea in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think the approach you take is different. The approach you take when you start with is you sit down, you get a leadership team, and if you've got any frontline people, you get them together in a room and you just talk about who are we trying to help with this product? And you go through the same thinking process. Who are they? What sort of companies do they work in? What are their challenges? How do they measure? And you capture your best view of that. It's your hypothesis. And then you put effort into building for that. Now, you then probably, you might not be as religious in sticking to that.
Sure.
Because you don't have that data on which to base that. But the advantage of that is it gives you a good base for developing your content, developing your messaging, developing your value proposition in ways that resonate to that customer base.
Yeah.
And you can test it. You can test it quite quickly. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, then you say, well, actually, let's go back and, maybe we've got the sort of company wrong. Maybe we're targeting the wrong sorts of individuals. Maybe we've got the right companies, the right individuals, but the wrong sort of time or context. So a bit like, you do with product, you try different things, see what works, and then test it again.
Yeah.
Now, even in an established company, ICP should not be a fixed thing. Any company that does not go back and review and think about its ICPs probably once a quarter, at least once every half year, is making a big mistake for two reasons. One is customers and technologies change.
Yeah.
So you need to think about what that is. And second is there may be some things coming in that you've never thought about. If I go back to my time at Clicktools, we thought of ourselves as a survey company. And that's where we built our primary, so we were targeting companies of a certain type, certain size, where customer experience mattered, and they had certain roles in place. So they probably had some sort of customer experience team or specialist.
Yeah.
And then we got this inquiry in from a company, not one that we targeted at all. And they said, oh, we don't want to use it for surveys, we want to use it for forms. And I thought, really? And they did. And they became a very, very successful customer and created an entirely new use case for us. We'd never thought about it as that.
Amazing.
And that became a big part of our business.
Yeah.
So you've got to be open to changing your ICPs. And for me, by the way, certain elements of ICP, particularly the role profile and the situational factors, they are effectively use case based.
Right.
The target companies may be common, but the other details are use case based because they tell you so much about the companies you're targeting and how they are thinking about getting success with your product.
Yeah.
And that's different if you're doing surveys to if you're doing forms, for example.
Interesting. Cool. So Dave, what do you...
And by the way, everything we've talked about there, customer success has got a contribution, but they're rarely the leading player in it. Sometimes they're not a player at all, which is a mistake in my book, but they're rarely the leading player. But so things like that are fundamental to the success of customers and the success of your business.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why, unless we start thinking about customer success outside of being just this post-sale, stop churn, get adoption, QBR mentality, organizations won't thrive.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. CS is the closest thing to your customers, right? And it's probably very easy sometimes. Yeah. And I guess it's very easy to look at the kind of standardized metrics we've discussed. And if they churn, it's like, oh, well, they didn't give a great NPS score or whatever that looks like. But if you're really close to your customers, that feedback loop, that important information.
Yeah. I see this a lot Luke, people saying that CS are, the closest to the customers in the organization. I would say perhaps two things about that. First is, if they are, that's a mistake for other people in the organization. So marketing should claim to be the closest people to the customers. Sales and account management should claim to be the closest people to customers. Product should claim to be the closest people to customers. And in some organizations, they are. In the best organizations, it's not who owns the customer, it's how do we get the different teams to build a shared understanding of what our customers are trying to achieve, how well we are doing that, and what we need to change to do that better. To say that, customer success owns the customer is a big mistake.
Yeah. Interesting. I'd love to get people's views on that. I'm sure there'll be some kickback, but no, I love it, and I totally see the perspective.
I'm not called a heretic for nothing, Luke.
Yeah, you've got to live up to the reputation, or you have to take it off LinkedIn. That's the rule. I guess we've only got so much time, Dave, so I want to make sure I get through the questions, and there's only a couple more. Appreciate you're a busy chap. What do you think the future of CS looks like then? So if you could cast your mind into the next 2-3+ years, where do you see CS?
Well, it's back to the first question. Are we talking about the customer success team or customer success as this red thread through the organization? So for the latter, I see customer success as being the red thread, the measurable results for chosen customers becoming more and more and more a part of how organizations think about and execute their go-to-market.
Right.
Unless what's called the CS department or team identifies its unique contribution in that environment, I don't see a future for CS.
Right. Interesting. And
by the way, I was very careful my choice of words. It has to be, what do they uniquely do?
Yeah.
Because this economic environment that's changed in the last couple of years, will it ease? Yes, and there are signs that it is doing. Will it go back to the goody days of 2 or 3 years ago? I doubt it. Probably not for 10 years. It might return after that because we've got a great ability to forget what history teaches us. But no, I think for the next 10 years, we are going to be faced with this recognition that sustainable growth, profitable growth, I prefer rather than sustainable, profitable growth has got to be at the core of what we do. And the only way to deliver that is to show how we deliver measurable results to customers. Now, I think that will lead to new roles, new tasks, and I think that will be accelerated by AI and machine learning. So I do see a very different future. And if I'm looking at starting a new business, which interestingly enough is all built around customer-led growth. How can I and the people I'm working with help companies implement this idea of measurable results for chosen customers across the life cycle? Because I think that is the key. So that's where I'm heading. So have I got a confirmation bias? Possibly, but I do recognize that to be the case.
Yeah.
But I think you've got to find what the role is in that. So I think we'll see things like much more around, and again, it's something I wrote about when we first met each other, probably back in 2015, 16. I remember talking to a CEO back then and came to me and said, because I was heading up an interim role, heading up a CS team. And he said, how many CSMs will you want next year? And how do we scale this from, a few hundred customers to tens of thousands of customers? And I went away and thought about that and went back and said, actually, if I give you 5 CSMs back, can I have 5 software engineers? Because I think we can actually deliver much of what we're doing in the product.
Right.
Now, that never came to fruition because they've got a roadmap and a way of developing the roadmap that was a bit arcane, but We'll see. I mean, don't get me wrong. We know the guy is very, very successful and love him to bits, but we used to have some great arguments.
Yeah.
But no, so I think it's going to change. So I think we'll see roles like a customer results product manager. I think we'll see roles like a customer results content developer.
Yeah.
So I think it will change, and I think AI and machine learning will help that.
Yeah.
And by the way, let's not hide behind the bushes here. Let's put it out there. The first stage of AI, which we're going through at the moment, will be about doing things more productively and better.
Yeah.
The next stage will be about doing things, either completely new things or things in a completely different way. And I think there's a little bit of rose-colored spectacles at the moment. I think we are in for a very significant change in, one, the type of jobs that we need people to do.
Yeah.
And secondly, the number of people we need to deliver a pound or a dollar or a euro of revenue. I think the revenue per FTE is going to go through the roof, which means one of two things. Either we're going to have to grow massively, and that's, there's a constraint on that, which is called the market, or we're going to have fewer people doing the same amount of work.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's a lot being posted out on LinkedIn. I would love your view of it, actually. So I don't feel this is talked about enough on LinkedIn. I feel there's a narrative of, which I think is great. There's a narrative of, I guess, positivity and a lot of the time how to do the same stuff better, not how to do better stuff to generate better results. It does feel we're kind of stuck in this loop, really. And sometimes, and there's some amazing stuff out there, but sometimes there's an insanity loop of the same stuff. And at the end of that, it's a bit, okay, and once you've read this, you can download my guide on how to do this for X amount of money. There's a sales narrative behind it. What's your thoughts on the echo chamber that is CS sometimes?
I always think of this, if we talk about the CS community particularly, I always think it's the best of communities and the worst of communities. If you want help on anything, you'll get it. If you want some advice, if you want some, a bit of coaching or anything like that, you'll get that. But I do think there is too much reinforcement and not enough questioning of fundamental principles. I'm a great believer in first principles thinking. I have made my career out of asking just two questions. One is why? Why do we do that? And if the answer comes back that there's a good reason for it, my second question is, well, why do we do it that way? Because all too often what we do is we just copy what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
And by definition, that's not best practice. It's common practice. Okay. And common practice is rarely best practice. So I think every now and then we've got to step back and say, hang on a minute, what is the purpose of what we are doing? Back to Simon Sinek's, start with why.
Yeah.
So I think it needs a bit more of that. And I think now is the time that we probably need it more than ever. The change in focus on the commercials, the change in recognizing go-to-market as a single entity rather than as separate teams, the change in technology with machine learning and AI. I think there's almost like a perfect storm coming to some organizations that they need to be prepared for. Yeah. And some people will get ahead of that wave and be very successful. Some people will get wiped out by it. Such is life. It's always been that way.
Yeah, agreed. Maybe finish on something more light-hearted. What's on the to-do list at the moment, Dave? What's ahead of you at the moment?
So the to-do list at the moment is dominated by two things. One is coaching a couple of people on some of these ideas, and the second is on working with a few really good people from a revenue perspective on building out some ideas and tools and frameworks and ways of helping people. So hopefully by the time this gets out or soon after, we'll launch something called the Customer-Led Growth Forum.
Awesome.
And that will be very much around, this is what we think it is. We've identified 13 capabilities that are required. I'm not saying there's anything new in them. I think what we've got that's different is that we have purposefully designed an approach where everything comes back to that, thinking about that DNA double helix. How do we deliver measurable results to customers? What capabilities we need to do that? And how do we convert that into profitable revenue for our company?
Yeah.
And there are so much of fundamental capabilities like deep understanding of customers and customer-centric leadership. There are others which are around execution. How do you design revenue motions and that sort of stuff. So
awesome.
Watch for mid to end September for that coming out.
Excellent.
Lots of good stuff, I hope, and that'll continue for a good few years in terms of producing content, producing ideas. We've already got a couple of case studies. So
what we'll do actually is we'll buy 5 copies off of you, and if you like and share this video content, we'll just pick you at random, ideally in the UK, easier to ship to.
Yeah,
I'm sure we can work something out.
Sure.
And we'll get some copies of that sent out, because it's a really great read, and a lot of the stuff we've discussed today, there's lots of relational content back to the book, which, especially as well for me, like around the revenue elements, really important. I think people should be reading it, and it should just be part of your CS library, I would say. But Dave, that's the questions for me, really. I think it's been a great conversation and been really good to pick your brains. I'd love to do this again, and there is some conversations with others about doing a bit more of a group session if you fancy it.
Okay.
We're recording, sure. So puts a bit more pressure on you to say yes.
I'll say yes.
Great, good stuff.
Yeah, provided my wife's not booked a holiday at that time, I'll say yes.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, look, it's been great. Really appreciate it. Obviously, like and subscribe, and keep an eye out for more content.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity, Luke. Really enjoyed it.